Hey, what's up, stock compounders? Brad here. So just the other day, I came across this fireside chat with Charlie Munger and Todd Combs. Now, this is a conversation they had last year, I think April 2022, for the Singleton Prize for CEO Excellence. Okay, it's 45 minutes long. There are a ton of great lessons in here. The quality isn't so great. You kind of have to squint your ears in a few different sections to try to figure out what Charlie is saying here. But I had on my calendar today to really comb through this and pull out the lessons for you guys and for myself, just to drill them down a little bit deeper. But in my email this morning, I got a message from Necker Substack. This is Frederick Gieshen's Substack. He already did the work. Okay, he combed through this conversation between Todd and Charlie and pulled out the really juicy nuggets. So in this video, we're just going to go through what Frederick pulled out for us already. I'll link to this Substack post in the description. Definitely give Frederick a follow. I probably bookmark like half of the things Frederick writes, which is a lot. So give him a follow, Necker Substack, and let's go through these gems. So highlights from Charlie Munger's conversation with Todd Combs. I am a guy who has been able to take moderate obsession and a long attention span and turn them into pretty good results. I'd say Charlie's had pretty good results. A long attention span will help you a lot if you're reasonably smart. Okay. So Munger recounted one of his last conversations with legendary CEO Henry Singleton, right, who tried to sell Teledyne to Berkshire. This was kind of Henry's last push before he was on his deathbed, basically. But he wanted stock for it. Okay, he didn't want cash for Teledyne. He wanted Berkshire stock. That was not going to fly with Buffett and Munger. New subsidiaries would usually be bought with cash, not newly issued stock. So Munger responded, Henry, we're not going to issue stock or give away all our business that we know and like and understand to get in another business we don't know and don't understand. It's just not going to happen. But Munger, of course, was a huge fan of Henry Singleton. You could say that a life like Singleton's, what it demonstrates is the vast power in being remorselessly rational. And, whenever Charlie is asked, what was the one key to your success? If you had to distill it down to one word, this is the word that Munger uses. I'm rational. Okay. So clearly, he would be a big fan of anyone who takes that very seriously. So here's the highlights from Munger's conversation on the nature of capitalism. The nature of capitalism is that all things die, but death is part of the creative process. Munger expanded on previously dominant businesses that declined during his lifetime. Just think of what I've seen wane. All the big department stores, all the big newspapers and monopolies, U.S. Steel, Alcoa, the auto manufacturers. General Motors once stood in the world like a colossus, and it eventually wiped out its own shareholders and part of its own workers' pensions. This is the nature of capitalism. GE is one of the worst cases of all because I knew Jack Welch. He was likable and he was intelligent, but he went a little crazy trying to do well in the system. He was very competitive. He wanted to win at golf, wanted to win at business, all over, everything. He just he got them into that wretched excess. In the end, he was lying about what had been accomplished. I think that book, Lights Out, which chronicles the decline of GE, ought to be required reading in every business school in the country. It won't be because they don't want to offend anyone, but it should be. If there's anybody here who's not read Lights Out, you should buy it and read it. You can argue that Rockefeller's empire was the only business of the old days, very old days, that really became a giant that's still lasting. Everybody else, it's all a type of mortality. They all die or become insignificant. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how Rockefeller's empire was able to continue on. There was a bit of luck involved. On the chemistry of booms and busts, the process of capitalism automatically speeds up in both booms and depressions, and it feeds on itself for a while. So it's like autocatalysis in chemistry. It's just automatic. You get this speed up in both directions, which makes it very, very dangerous. Ever the optimist. The Great Depression came from excesses which in many ways aren't as bad as those we have now. You see, ever the optimist. It's a bit of sarcasm there. And with those cheerful thoughts, we should go on to the next question. So that's a bold statement. The Great Depression came from excesses which in many ways aren't as bad as those we have now. And of course, Charlie Munger points out Hitler was in large part a product of the Great Depression. Okay, so it's a little scary what he's saying there. And I think it's also why Charlie really dislikes these bubbles that the market comes into every once in a while. It's very dangerous for what can come next. It sets the stage for pretty scary situations. On inflation, it won't be my problem if I'm honest. It may be your problem. So Charlie likes to, joke around about how he's not going to see, things that are going to happen 5, 10, 20 years from now. They're not going to be Charlie's problem because he's 99 years old. But for a lot of us, we're going to have to figure out how to navigate these things. It's the nature of things that a bunch of democratically elected politicians will eventually print too much money. Now, this isn't a Democrat versus Republican thing. This is a democratic democracy that Charlie is referring to here. Now, in my life, I would argue that what we have now is so valuable. The fact that the currency went down by 80% or 90% over the last 100 years or so, it was worth having the depreciation of the currency to get the growth. I don't think it was a bad bargain for civilization so far. But on the other hand, the Weimar inflation that eventually led to Hitler's rising, that's a different problem. To get into that, it won't be my problem. If I'm honest, it may be your problem. So, basically what he's saying here is some inflation is okay, right? Especially if the trade-off is that we get growth. Too much, though, is dangerous. On investing, intelligence versus temperament. Warren used to say, you really don't need to be very smart to be a very successful investor. And I think Warren was right. It's a field where temperament is. It's good to have the extra mental horsepower that Singleton had. That's helpful, but it's perfectly possible to do splendidly well if you have the right temperament. And you just go at it over a very long time. So temperament and patience is really above intelligence, especially if you're talking, you have a base level of intelligence. You don't need a lot more than that. You're much better off if you trade that extra intelligence for temperament and patience. And patience is, I would argue, a part of temperament. You just need one or two great businesses. The people who tend to get the best results are fanatics. Munger talked about Ken Langone. The people who tend to get the best results are these fanatics who just keep searching for the great businesses, right? They don't compromise. They're waiting for that pitch right in the sweet spot, even if it takes multiple years to take one swing, right? Patience and insisting on only swinging at the best pitches, only betting on the best opportunities. And the best of them don't expect to find 10 or 20 or 30. They find 1 or 2. And that's the right way to do it. All you need are 1 or 2. I know the guy who invests with the banker that backed the Costco copy, which was Home Depot. He also backed Eli Lilly very early. He has several $billion between those two investments. He didn't need any more. And a lifetime of investment banking, that's what he got. 2. I regard that as a successful life. Okay. Now, this is an extreme version of what Warren Buffett talked about in the recent Berkshire letter, right? That it's really 12 decisions that made the success of Berkshire Hathaway. 1 every 5 years. Obviously, this is more extreme. 2 in a lifetime of investing. That isn't what they teach in our educational institutions. They need some mystery that they can teach that will make you good at investing. It's total BS. There is no way to know enough about 1,000 different stocks to be very good at it. Half the secret of life: obsession and a long attention span. Right? We already covered this, but let's go a little deeper. I'm not a polymath. This is what Charlie Munger is saying. I'm not a polymath. I'm a guy who has been able to take moderate obsession and a long attention span and turn them into pretty good results, I'd say. A long attention span will help you a lot if you're reasonably smart. If you're reasonably obsessed with something, even if it's intermittent, and you have a long attention span, you keep working over the serious problems. You'll stumble into an answer. That's half the secret of life. Okay? Very big statement here. It's pretty simple. Obsession, it doesn't need to be continuous, but that obsession has to be there, and you have to keep at it for years and years and years, and you're going to stumble into an answer. Charlie's life changed at age 7. Okay, this was quite humorous, I think, to not just me, everyone at the Fireside chat, when he realized even smart people were not acting rationally all the time. So Todd Combs asked Charlie, when asked how old you were when you figured out the secret to life, you said 7. When I realized everyone's a little bonkers and there's so much irrationality in the world. So Munger says, my father had a great friend whose father had been the chief mathematician at the University of Nebraska, and he played the violin. He was mechanically gifted. He was an enormously talented man. But he'd been very poor because in those days, a mathematics professor of a university got paid practically nothing. And this man had conquered poverty all those years of scholarship, working 90-hour weeks. I loved him and I admired him. His house was an alternative house for me. I went back and forth because he had children my age. And one day, the man got a leak in his house that caused some extra cost. And he practically went berserk. All that power he had, he took extra care of the home. Things like leaks. Of course, a surgeon would be very fanatic about leaks too. Anyway, he went berserk, and I thought, God Almighty, here's this genius going berserk. A world where even geniuses are that nuts. I have a chance. Okay, so very amusing way to put it, but makes sense, right? You can be a genius and still have a temperament that leaves a lot of room for improvement. So Charlie thought, if I can just master the temperament, I don't need to be a genius, and I can still outperform the geniuses. I almost worship reason. You can argue that Henry Singleton did too, and certainly Warren Buffett does. The people I know that are good, they feel you have a duty to become as wise as you can be by constantly studying things and thinking about it. And that angle is partly temperamental, and partly it was family example in my case. My grandfather Munger, whose name I bear, was a self-made, self-educated man. He was a damn genius, and I watched him, and his life worked pretty well. he was not making many mistakes. So, some evidence here for why Charlie Munger puts reason and rationality over pretty much everything else. Look for the wooden system. If you can find a mini Singleton or a mini Buffett and play them when they have a hell of a run, that can be a very good way to invest. So Munger mentioned this in the 2014 letter, noting that Buffett out-woodened Wooden, because all decisions, that is, the exercise of skill, was concentrated in just one person. And with the extra playing time, the best players improved more than was normal. Okay, so we'll talk about Wooden and how he came to have the best basketball coaching record in the world. Munger's advice in this talk is to find people who apply this and thus improve faster than their competitors. Wooden had the best basketball coaching record in the world, and nobody else was even close. How did he do it? The answer was he concentrated almost 100% of the playing time on his top 7 players. And of course, they got better and better during all the extra playing time. And that's what happens when you give so much power to a Wooden or a Buffett or something. You're doing the Wooden system, and it works like gangbusters. As an investor, if you can find somebody, even as a mini Wooden or a mini Singleton or a mini Buffett, and play them, and when they have a hell of a run, certainly that can be a very good way to invest. Look for people with the fiduciary gene. Todd Combs, some of your heroes, not exclusive, Lee Kuan Yew, Otto von Bismarck, George Marshall, they all seem to have a sense of duty and honor as a common thread. Munger, I like the fiduciary gene. I think of the difference between somebody like George Washington, who voluntarily left power, setting an example, and these paranoid rulers who come into power and start killing people to stay in power, trying to subvert the systems, and so forth. What maybe the current world is teaching us is our forefathers who gave us term limits, they understood human nature, right? They understood when somebody gets in power, they're likely to do everything they can to try to keep that power. So let's build into the system these term limits to combat that human tendency. They were trying to prevent some major rifts, and it has worked pretty well so far. A little perspective on life. 200 years ago, we'd all be in a field going to work and never leaving the little valley we were born in, and having fungus we couldn't fix, watching our children die of nasty diseases. It was not an easy life, right? So just think of how far we've come over the last 200 years. The secret behind the windowless dorms. A lot of controversy here. A lot of controversy. Munger's design of this dormitory, right, where a lot of the rooms don't have windows. He gives some insights as to why that design made sense. Munger borrowed the idea from cruise ships. If you followed Munger, you probably know about his controversial designs for windowless college dormitories. I knew those students would be better off close together, right? So that's what he was really designing for. The students being in close proximity to each other. That was the primary design consideration. You get them close together, and then you get window shortages. Absolutely unavoidable. And so I thought, how in the hell can I handle this? Well, I went to the cruise ships and figured out how they handled it. Because most staterooms, not most, but a lot of the staterooms on a cruise ship can't have real windows. On a cruise ship, obviously there are certain design considerations, right? You want kind of the maximum number of rooms for a given volume of a ship. And Munger thought, well, that would work pretty well for dormitories as well, if you're designing for students being as close together as possible. They used artificial windows, and they had a system where you could leave your own place and go into the light and air, all kinds of things, right? So you can't open your window, but you can get outside fairly easily. So I just copied the cruise ship and their invention. What kind of a mind in designing a dormitory imitates a cruise ship? Well, that's what my mind does, and it's coolly logical. That's the kind of mind Singleton had, too. He was just coolly logical. But if you don't think of the cruise ship, you get the wrong answer, right? You get a design that doesn't optimize for students being close to one another. There are people who will make you feel that you're born into the wrong species. I really liked this section. It's nice to know there are people who leave even Charlie Munger stunned, okay, for what they can do. Caltech has a Rubik's Cube contest every year. And a guy came in and he gave them scrambled cubes and he juggled 3 or 4 of them. As they went by, he was twirling them in his hands. So as he's juggling these Rubik's Cubes, he's twisting them. Ridiculous. Even though they were constantly in motion there, nobody will ever top that. He solved all of the cubes as he was juggling them. Now this may be even more impressive, this second one. The next year, in came a woman. They gave her 2 cubes all scrambled, right? So she has these 2 Rubik's Cubes, and she looked at them for a long, long time. So she's studying both of the Rubik's Cubes. She put one in her left hand, one in her right hand, put them behind her back, and started twirling. And then brought them out, both solved. Right? That really happened. There are people who will make you feel that you're born into the wrong species. So Munger, just had such appreciation for how a human could perform a feat like that. And that's really the approach to take, right? It's easy for us humans to fall in the trap of envy. Oh, I wish I could do that. Why can't I do that? I must be deficient in some way. But for Charlie, it was just awe. Wow, this is incredible. So that's it, guys. That's Charlie's talk. I highly recommend you guys listen to it for yourselves. This isn't video. It's really just audio. And it's not great, but it's fun to hear Charlie in conversation with, someone who's at the top of their game now, Todd Combs. He asks some very concise questions. Clearly a guy who's studied Charlie Munger for a long time. So it's particularly fun to witness these conversations where there's that depth of appreciation and respect from the questioner to someone like Charlie Munger. So I'll link to the podcast on YouTube in the description, 45 minutes. And I'll also link to this Necker Substack so you guys can go through, read through it again. It's well worth it. And give Frederick a follow on Necker Substack. Thanks for watching, everyone. I will see you all in the next video. Take care.